Okay, I think we'll make a start. So welcome again to the webinar today. We're going to look to explore how you can unlock the power of disabled talent in the workplace. My name's Matt Reed. I'm the head of corporate here at Medigold Health, and I'm delighted to have you with us today. Before we introduce the panelists and make a start, just wanted to go through some basic housekeeping for today, for those of you maybe have not attended one of our webinars before. So first of all, the session is being recorded. We don't send out copies of our slides following this session. What we will do, however, is we will upload the session to YouTube and send out a link to all those who registered and or attended on the day. Obviously, please feel free to share these videos with any team members, and all the details for how you access those will be sent out on the email, hopefully tomorrow at some point. Now, you're not going to be visible during the webinar. We've got several hundred people registered for today, and therefore, for expediency, to make it a good experience for everybody, everybody's cameras are off and the microphones are muted as well. However, these things are always better when they're interactive. We will have some time at the end, be sort of 10 to 15 minutes, depending on time, to answer as many of the questions that you may have. So as we're going, feel free to use the chat section, the Q&A section at the top, put your questions in, and then we'll come back to as many of those as we possibly can at the end of the session. So we are delighted today. I appreciate many of you will have attended our webinars before. We are delighted that today is a little bit of a change. We are joined by one of our key workplace adjustment partners with BT. So I'll let them introduce themselves alongside Kath, who is a bit of an ever-present, so a lot of you will recognise Kath from previous webinars. But Marc, do you want to start by introducing yourself?
Thank you, Matt. Hello, everyone. I'm glad to be here. My name's Marc Townsend. I'm the Senior ER Manager for BT Group. So we've been working with HML for, certainly in the workplace adjustment space, for about a year now. I have my colleague here, Charles, as well. I'll let Charles introduce himself. But we'd like to go through a few slides today just to talk about our journey, why we engaged with HML, what's happened over the last year, and hopefully that's of benefit for everybody who's on the call. So over to you, Charles.
Thank you, Marc. So I'm Charles. I'm an Inclusion, Diversity Enablement Manager at BT Group. I've been here about a year and a half. And I lead on disability, and I also lead on making our workplace inclusive and accessible from an inclusion perspective. Kath, would you like to introduce yourself?
Thank you, Marc. Thank you, Charles. And I'm really delighted to be here with our two special guests. So I'm Kath Wood, Disability Training Consultancy Specialist, lead for products and consultancy. And I'm really passionate about the topic of disability, and I'm looking forward to taking you through the session today. So I'm going to make a start. In my part today, I'm going to be talking about some simple changes which can help your businesses attract, recruit, support and retain disabled talent. But I'm going to really start with exploring why these changes are really important for your business. So let's start with some stats, looking at prevalence to start with. So the Family Resources Survey in 2022 found there were 14.6 million people in the UK who have a disability, which is 22% of the total population. So more than 1 in 5 of us will be affected by disability at some point in our lives. According to the Disabled People in Employment House of Commons briefing paper in 2021, there are 8.4 million people of working age who are disabled, which is 20% of the working age population. The Employers Forum on Disability report that 2% of the working age population becomes disabled every year, and 78% of disabled people acquire their impairments aged 16 or above. And finally, a report called Employment of Disabled People states that the disability employment rate was 52.6%. in July to September 2022. This compared to 82.5% in non-disabled people. There was a disability employment gap of 29.8%. Now let's explore some further stats about disabled people's experience of employment. So 2 reports in 2017 from Scope found that 58% of disabled people feel at risk of losing their jobs, and 53% have experienced bullying, harassment at work because of their impairments. A Health and Wellbeing at Work report in 2014 found that 1 in 3 employees with a health condition had not discussed it with their employer, even when it affected their work. Two more reports on scope. The disability price tag in 2019 find that life as a disabled person costs you £583 more on average a month. And their disability perception gap report found that 32% of disabled people and 22% of non-disabled people feel there's a lot of prejudice against disabled people. So what do these stats tell us? That every business has disabled employees, whether you know it or not, that any employee could acquire a disability at any time, and with an ageing workforce, it's becoming more and more likely there will be an increase in the number of people acquiring a disability while they're working. There are disabled people who want to work, but it's not always easy for them to find a job. There are barriers in the recruitment process and in the workplace, which makes things harder for them. It also tells us that many disabled people feel uncomfortable disclosing their disability, which means that employers cannot offer them the support or make adjustments. And this increases the risk that they will be absent from work or even leave their jobs. And overall, this tells us there is action that we need to take on recruitment and retention of disabled employees. So, if you're able to realise that potential of disabled employees in your business, it can have many benefits. Let's start with the benefits to you as an employer. So you'll have access and tap into a wider talent pool, not just disabled employees or disabled applicants, but also those that specifically look for business which is inclusive and diverse. You'll be able to harness all the talent, perspectives and approaches that disabled employees can bring to your business. You can also increase employee retention as people feel valued and supported, and it can reduce the cost of sickness absence because you're able to make changes that enable somebody to stay in work. There's also an opportunity for your staff to develop transferable skills through mentoring or coaching, and managers will develop knowledge and skills that they can use more widely. Often by making these changes to our processes to remove barriers for disabled people, it actually makes things easier for everyone. This could include simplifying and streamlining processes, creating that barrier-free working environment where everybody can get involved and contribute, enhance productivity by providing different tools and better training, and generally improving morale and engagement and loyalty, as colleagues know they will be treated fairly if they do develop a health problem or a disability. There's also commercial benefits of being known as a disability inclusive business. The knowledge that you gain can help you to develop better designed products and services, deliver better tailored and more adapted services, provide clear and accessible communications, and ensure that your premises are fully accessible. But also being known as a disability inclusive business can really enhance your brand and reputation, help you stand out from the crowd in your sector, reach a wider market, and improve customer retention. You can also get access to the Purple Pound, which is the spending power of disabled people and their families, which is worth an estimated £274 billion a year. Plus, there are customers who look for businesses who offer social value. So, what do we mean by the Purple Pound? Let's explore it a little bit more. This is the spending power of disabled households. This is a household in which at least one member has a disability. Organisations are missing out on the business of disabled consumers due to poor accessibility, both physical and digital, and not being disability confident in their customer service approach. So we know that more than 1 in 5 in the UK people are disabled. Families of disabled people spend around £274 billion a year. 75% of disabled people and their families have walked away from the UK business because of poor accessibility or poor customer service. 73% of potential disabled customers experience barriers on a quarter of the websites they visited, and only 3% of the internet is accessible for somebody with a disability. So businesses could lose around £2 billion a month by ignoring the needs of disabled people. And this is broken down by sector on the slide. So now we know how the changes can benefit a business, and being disability inclusive has many, many benefits. Let's look at the changes that we can make. So we're going to be considering some simple changes under the headings of attraction, recruitment, and support, which is retention and progression of disabled employees. So the first thing we need to think about is the first impression that we're making. What would a disabled applicant want to know about your business, and how would they find out about your business? What are they really looking for? So potentially they're going to look on your website and your social media and hope to see statements about diversity and inclusion, strong values and mission, and hopefully case studies showing disabled people in your organisation. It's important that your websites are accessible, ideally with a page specifically about accessibility. There should be an option to increase the size of text as well as change the background colour or text colour. And the site should be compatible with screen reading software. It can also help to have a clear structure and good navigation tools, such as a skip to content or link to content. And if you do have any videos, these should have subtitles or signing or both. If your business is already disability confident, then it's important to display that logo prominently and ideally have a link through to more information about that scheme. Then we need to consider our recruitment methods and if you're reaching a disabled audience. Wide-reaching options such as Indeed or through the Job Centre will indeed increase the chances of reaching the right people. But best practice would be to use disability-specific sites or organisations such as Evenbreak or Ridden, or use employment programmes such as Restart or Work and Health Programme. For your adverts, job descriptions and person specifications, it's really key to think about the language that you use, the duties that you describe, and the skills that you say are required. If the aim is to attract a diverse set of applicants, you need to make an effort to not put people off by the language that's used. Anything that's written should be clear and concise, avoiding jargon, technical language, abbreviations, or acronyms. The duties you describe should be the essential, frequent, and regular duties. Mentioning a particular task that's done only twice a year, which somebody might find difficult, could mean they don't apply. And in reality, it could be a simple process of reallocation within the team. It's a good idea if you can specify essential and desirable skills, so the applicant, again, is not put off if they can't show one particular skill. It's also good practice to follow and focus on that generic skill rather than a particular method or a piece of software or equipment. An individual might not apply if they can't use that method or equipment, but actually would be very, very capable of completing that task in their own way. So one of the reasons that we want to attract disabled talent is to have access to fresh ideas and alternative ways of thinking. So we need to think about how we're not going to put that talent off. It's important that we're also aware of unconscious bias in the choice of words we use too. For example, using the word drive or driving licence automatically excludes those who are not able to drive. So using a phrase such as travel for work would be much more inclusive. So moving on to the application process. Next slide, Matt, please. So we're going to look at recruitment and the application process. And ideally, we need to be focusing on accessibility. Online processes need to be able to work with assistive technology, but also we should be open to using alternative ways to apply. People might use a Word document or even the option to apply by telephone and have somebody scribe that application form for them. Any documents that we use in recruitment processes need to be available in an accessible format. So job descriptions, person specifications, and application form, particularly. It needs to be made clear somewhere on your career site that you can make adjustments to the recruitment process. And there should be a contact number or email displayed so people can ask for help if they need it. If you're using online screening, tests or assessments, then we need to think about how these might present a barrier for disabled applicants. We need to think about, is this screening or assessment really essential? Could it be missed out? Or if not, how can it be adjusted for a disabled applicant? Any business that's part of a disability confidence scheme should be offering guaranteed interviews to disabled people that meet the minimum criteria for a job. But this would bypass the need for any further screening. It's important then why you need to specify those essential criteria, because that's the criteria we would use. It's also important to recognise that there are only certain reasons that you can ask about disability, and we need to be careful what we ask in our application forms. So the main one is the reason we should ask is to offer those adjustments to the process. So any questions that we do use in the application process about disability, do not ask for details about somebody's disability, but instead ask what adjustments to the process they need. Once we reach the interview stage, there should be further opportunity for the individual to disclose their disability and request adjustments. These adjustments could include providing an accessible location, not just about wheelchair access, but also quiet and with good lighting, particularly if somebody is lip reading, for example. Could be adjusting the start times to avoid a busy commute or to accommodate the side effects of anybody taking medication. Think about shortening the interview or taking breaks during the meeting. You could allow the applicant, and indeed all applicants, to bring in notes, their CV, or an application form. You could permit somebody to bring a supporter with them, And this is not about answering the questions on their behalf, but providing moral support and attempting to help explain or rephrase any questions. Anybody who is hearing impaired might require an interpreter for the interview, and interviews in general may need to adjust their language, avoiding jargon, technical language and acronyms, and if necessary, think about rephrasing some of the questions to make sure they're fully understood. Finally, let's move on to the support in the workplace. And this is something that Marc and Charles are going to talk about a little bit more from their point of view. But once somebody is appointed, we want them to feel accepted and supported from day one. And this is all about the culture of the business and the practical support that's put into place. So 3 important things to consider: having a disability confident and open culture, the workplace adjustments you can put into place, and support services, resources and training. So culture change really starts at the top. So you need a clear commitment from senior leadership. This is vital for driving the change within each department, but also showing that all employees that disability is important to the business. Case studies or blogs from well-known disabled colleagues who talk about their own experiences are really powerful. This shows that disability has not prevented people from being successful in your business. This is a great message to all colleagues, but particularly to those with a disability who have not yet spoken openly about it. Think about how you can mark disability awareness days and weeks with events and campaigns, as this gives disability a prominent place. There are so many events to choose from and so many resources that you can download from specialist organisations, which is really cost effective and time effective. And it's important to ensure that disability features in internal and external comms, showing an ongoing commitment made by the organisation. Now let's talk about workplace adjustments. So under the Equality Act 2010, they are defined as adjustments to make sure that as far as is reasonable, the disabled worker has the same access to everything that's involved in doing and keeping a job as a non-disabled person. This is a good description, and there is a requirement for employers to make adjustments when somebody has a disability. But there are other reasons why adjustments should be put in place. All employers have a duty to care for the health and well-being of employees, and adjustments help reduce the impact of work on somebody's health. Plus, if adjustments are in place, disabled employees will be able to work to their full potential, and this will improve business productivity. The Act specifies 3 types which help us to see a range of options. Change, which is about changing the way we do things. Changes to policies, one-off decisions, exemptions from policies, changes to working conditions and hours, such as flexible working or working from home. Physical changes, which is making changes to overcome the barriers created by the physical features of the workplace. So this could be handrails, adjustable lighting, widening doorways, or automatic doors. And finally, aids and services. These include providing extra help, such as an interpreter or job coach, or equipment, such as adjustable desks, ergonomic chairs, or assistive software. The adjustment that somebody needs is very individual. It depends on their disability or health condition, and also on the tasks and the job they do. So when a manager is discussing adjustments with an individual, the individual is clearly the expert on their disability, and the manager is the expert on the tasks of the job. So together they should be able to identify and implement the right adjustments. We'd also hope that employees have access to employee assistance programs or an occupational health service to support employees whose disability is affecting their work. You could also work with disability organisations and display their details on your intranet or collect and share disability information and resources. Managers play a really important role in implementing policies and supporting colleagues directly. So we'd highly recommend providing managers and HR colleagues with disability training as well as awareness sessions for all colleagues. So I'd like to hand you over now to Charles and also Marc to talk a little bit about their experiences at the BT.
Great, thank you, Kath. And thanks everyone for letting us come and talk to you a little bit about our journey and where we came from and where we are now. Could we please move on to the next slide? Okay, so first of all, a bit why we did this. So BT Group had a really strong history of disability inclusion. We knew all the great stuff that Kath was talking about. We recognised all the benefits of getting it right for disabled talent and colleagues. And we also understood that adjustments are one of the most effective tools to get it right for disabled colleagues, like the most effective thing to remove barriers that disabled people experience in the workplace and to help them perform to their best. But over time, the process that we had become fragmented. Things had changed, it had become confusing. and it was difficult for colleagues to have a consistent experience across the business. So, for example, colleagues in our customer-facing parts of the business had a very different experience to colleagues who were based in offices. And we really wanted everyone to have a really great and consistent experience across the business. And then it was really important we listened to our disabled colleagues. So we have a colleague network called Able2, and they were a key stakeholder in us understanding what the barriers were for our disabled colleagues. And they told us there was delays in receiving adjustments, and we know that we need to make adjustments and make them in a good and timely fashion. The process was confusing to navigate, so not just for managers who are making processes, but making adjustments, but also for colleagues to understand who to speak to, how to get the adjustments, how to have that conversation. And then line manager understanding of adjustments of disability was low as well. So as Kath was saying, that's a really important part of getting it right. So we needed everyone to understand disability, we needed everyone to understand the legal obligations around disability and how to make adjustments for disabled colleagues. And another part of the puzzle was our senior disability sponsors. So we've got an executive committee member called Howard, who's our sponsor for disability, and he's really, really passionate about this. And he really wanted us to get it right for our disabled colleagues. So I'd say engaging with your senior leaders is essential in getting it right for disabled people and getting the adjustments process up and running. So we knew we knew there was issues, and we knew roughly what those issues might be, but we really wanted to get an external expert in to help us understand the issues and also to give us more credibility when we're taking these issues to the business and to get funding and to get the buy-in to start the process. So we commissioned Business Disability Forum, who are one of our partners, to review our current processes and our current situation and make recommendations for improvement. So the BDF came in, and the first thing they did was a desk review. So they looked at all of the paperwork that we have relating to adjustments, any processes, guidance, things that are on our intranet. They reviewed it all for us, and that was the first part of the process, the desk review. Then they did a number of focus groups with disabled colleagues who really felt it was important to keep that colleague voice in the conversation. And then they interviewed line managers, because line managers are such an essential part of making adjustments. It's that first conversation between the colleague and the line manager where the whole process gets kicked off for an adjustment. And if that doesn't go well, then it's not going to go well at all. Then we interviewed other key stakeholders. So adjustments aren't just about the colleague and the line manager, but there's lots of other parts of the business who are involved in making adjustments. So for example, finance. So we need to know how adjustments are paid for. Property, so there might be physical changes to the building. IT, so we needed kit or other specialist equipment for colleagues to use. And then finally, occupational health. So all these different parts of the puzzle had to come together. So Business Disability Forum spoke to all of those stakeholders, and then finally they produced a report with a number of findings and recommendations, which I'm going to just talk over in the next slide. So the findings from Business Disability Forum weren't a massive surprise to us. A lot of the stuff we had kind of had an idea of already. But the first thing that we found out was the internal resource had reduced, making it difficult to deliver adjustments effectively. So we used to have a number of people who were specifically involved in making adjustments for colleagues. And just due to kind of natural changes in our workforce, that resource had reduced. So there was less support from managers and colleagues to get those adjustments. Individual line manager was signing off adjustments. The process wasn't centralized, and that was leading to discrepancies. So one manager might sign off something, another manager might have the same request and decline that request, but there was no overarching view of what was happening across the business. It wasn't clear how referrals to access to work fitted into the process, and access to work is a government scheme that can provide funding for adjustments, but that wasn't being accessed consistently, and there was no clear, sometimes it was being accessed, but there was no clear process about how that fitted into the wider workplace adjustments process. Once the adjustment was delivered, it wasn't then reviewed effectively. So one of the key things we found is actually once you put that adjustment in place, you need to go back and check if that is the right adjustment, is it actually effective, and does the colleague require anything else? And then adjustments were not being put in place consistently during the recruitment process and for existing employees moving to new roles. So we found that some colleagues were getting adjustments through the recruitment process, some were not. There was no colleagues, applicants were not being consistently asked if they required adjustments when they're applying for roles internally or as an external applicant. And again, we wanted everyone to have that consistent experience. And then there's a lack of single ownership over the process. So lots of different people owned lots of different bits of it. They sometimes weren't talking to each other, and there was no oversight on how that all fitted together and making sure there was smooth handoffs between different parts of the process and that adjustments were being put in place seamlessly for all colleagues. Moving over to Mark.
Thank you, Charles. Yeah, so just picking the baton up from Charles there in terms of, well, how do we operationalize this process? It was true that we had a sort of disparate way of dealing with workplace adjustments across BT Group, and the thinking very much was to centralize that, to have a single point of ownership, and that came into the employee relations team, principally because we are used to dealing with managers through people processes. We are aware of the need to make reasonable adjustments, and that comes up in some of the ACAS work or employment tribunal work that we do from time to time as well. So it was key that we had that expertise, if you like, in terms of what does good look like and what does getting it wrong look like as well. But in order for us to actually move it forward and to operationalize it, we needed to sort of map out the process. You know, how do we go from colleague needs the adjustment, manager has the conversation, can the manager and the colleague resolve that themselves through self-serve? I'll come on to that in a second. Or does it need to go into a referral? Having that referral assessed for quality and appropriateness, and then for that to flow through into HML. So very much a blank piece of paper, and how do we want to work that? And what we did in BT was created a guided journey. Now, we have guided journeys for many people processes in BT, discipline, grievance, through to some of the health processes we have as well, which are journeys that managers can follow through, as I say, a guided journey. And at various points through that journey, it will prompt and ask certain questions which allow the manager to see if they can self-serve that particular point. It may well be a colleague needs a keyboard that is available from our internal IT store. That can be self-served by a manager. So there's these various points where the manager can make a determination, a decision. Can I self-serve this? If not, then it would go through to a full referral. So we mapped all that out. But what was really important in mapping that out was linking into our customers, if you like, across the business. So stakeholders in each of our customer-facing units to demonstrate that guided journey, what we thought it should look like, what those steps were, what those sort of touch points were, and how did they feel about it? Was it user-friendly? Would their managers be able to work with that? Was there any recommendations? And that served two purposes, really. Purpose one, actually just getting their feedback and could we improve it? But purpose two is engagement very early on with the business. They feel part of the setup, part of the process, and therefore they're going to be advocates of the process going forward. And that really did help in launching the process. Alongside that, we developed an intranet page, so obviously where colleagues can go, find out a bit more about workplace adjustments, what they are, and what they need to do if they feel the need to have a workplace adjustment. We also created a Qualtrics survey, an NPS survey, satisfaction survey, whereby once the colleague had gone through the process, had the adjustments in place, That was followed by a satisfaction survey to get their feedback in terms of how that journey was for them, how that process was for them, any recommendations for change, which has been really helpful for us actually. On the whole, the NPS scores we have been really positive, been as high as +80, which is really excellent colleague experience. However, we have had some feedback along the way, which has really helped us to refine and improve the process as well. Charles touched on this. We did establish, once we were operational with it, good working links with our people in IT, property, to make sure that, from an IT point of view, adaptive software was reaching colleagues, in a timely manner, appropriately, and so on and so forth. And similar for some of the property adaptations that we need to make. I wouldn't underestimate stuff like purchase orders and invoicing. If this is something you're not doing currently and you're looking to do, understanding the finance piece, making sure that you have the finances in place. You can set up an invoicing process between you and HML, and in BT particularly, that's really important, as we sort of charge back the units that are using that as well. So they're really keen to understand the volumes that are going through in their particular unit and the types of adjustments that we're servicing. Again, Charles touched on this, but I'll reiterate it. It's really, really important to have executive sponsorship or senior leadership sponsorship. You've got that sort of top-down sponsorship. It really helps. It helps not only the networks, Able To is our network internally in BT Group, but also those key stakeholders as part of the process to come together under that executive leadership to make sure that we're doing what we set out to do. Where we're not, we can course correct, and that there's that live two-way communication ongoing in order to make sure the colleagues' voice is heard. And as I say, we're meeting our objectives in this space. And just move on, please, Matt. And then, so as I say, we've been running with workplace adjustments for the past year, almost exactly coming up to a year. We had great adoption from our frontline team. So we have a number of contact centres across the country who, by nature of their job, have sedentary jobs, sat in chairs, at desks, and so on and so forth. So there was a lot of interest and a lot of volume that came through, certainly from that consumer area. But also we have a very diverse workforce. We have not only the consumer area, who I would say are our main users of the service, but we have corporate functions, we have open reach, we have with engineers, with digital teams, business teams, and so on and so forth. So we have a real variety of people and types of jobs across the business. So it's been really interesting, actually, throughout the last year to see which areas have been using it, why they've been using it, and what types of adjustments we've been put in place. And unsurprisingly, that does differ from unit to unit, depending on the job that they do. Charles mentioned we have the Able To network. We've established an ongoing two-way communication between not only us and employee relations, but also what we're hearing through the process from colleagues, from managers, from HML themselves, and being able to represent that and coming together with our Able To network, and vice versa, Able To with the channels into the Able To network, voices of the colleague, and so on and so forth, comments coming back into that group as well. As with any process, we've refined it along the way. We've seen continuous improvement opportunities. We've worked with HML very effectively to change something we feel we can do it better, or to introduce something new if we feel we need to, or remove something because we thought it would work that way and it didn't quite. And that's really healthy, actually. And I would say, keep focused on not only the setup, but the continuous improvement along the way. As with all processes, the business, the stakeholders within the business want good reporting around this and analytics. HML provide us with a monthly report, which is really helpful. We have our own case data as well, and bringing those two things together and actually getting some richness and insights out of that data is really important to the business. Lastly, what I would say is placing the colleague at the centre of this, the colleague experience. You know, we set out a year ago to harness everything that we'd heard from our colleagues in terms of it was a bit clunky, it was a bit fragmented, as Charles said, and actually moving the needle on that, placing the colleague at the centre, making sure there's some follow-up with a colleague after they've had their adjustment in place, that they feel, yes, I was listened to, I was dealt with in a timely manner, and had some follow-up as well. That really is the culture that BT are driving for, certainly in this space and many other spaces, to make sure that colleagues feel that they are properly supported with any adjustments that they need. So that's it from me, Matt and Charles, and we're open to any questions.
Thank you very much. Thanks, Mark and Charles and Kath, as always, for a really interesting and informative webinar. Now, I'm going to stop sharing. We have got a couple of questions that have been asked as we go through, so we will try to work through those. Before we do that, I just want to introduce, we've got Richard Southern here with us as well, who is our Head of Workplace Adjustments, and we've asked Richard to join us specifically for the Q&A session, so thank you for doing that, Richard. We've got 2 or 3 questions that we'll come back to. They're quite specific, so it'll be interesting to get people's feedback. But before we do that, I think just to go back over some of the things you've said, just some kind of high-level questions. I think appreciating, as Mark and Charles have both alluded to, that I think BT is, as well as the size of the organisation and the scale, I think the positive, but often the different thing to a lot of people who might be on this webinar, a lot of organisations looking to do something. I think you already said, Charles, I think it was you said that you were quite a way on this webinar, on this journey, should I say, and actually the responses you got from that engagement weren't necessarily such a surprise, but they did reaffirm some of your assumptions. Just going back to the start of that, as a bit of advice really for organisations that might be maybe starting that journey, what would you think for an organisation would be the most important thing to consider when they're looking to make a positive change in this direction? So, Charles, I'll come to you first of all.
Well, I think for me, I think Mark and I both said this, getting senior buy-in is really, really important. I think that it's really difficult to make the changes purely from the bottom up. You need to have bottom up and top-down change. And I think as well, like building that business case, like Kath gave loads and really useful stats, information about building that business case. You can take that to your senior leaders, and start to influence that way. And then I think also maybe like pulling the different levers that you've got. So there's a legal requirement, and that might speak to some people. There's an ethical piece, and then there's the kind of business benefits as well. So just thinking about the different conversations you're going to have with different stakeholders, and maybe tailoring your message a little bit as well.
Great, thanks, Charles. Anything else you want to add, Mark?
Yeah, I mean, it's about being an employer of choice, you know, in terms of applicants looking to come into the business. I would just say that it's a great opportunity for an employer to really promote themselves as being inclusive, having processes in place like the workplace adjustment we've just spoken about there, which is really going to benefit colleagues straight away. Yes, there's legal requirements, Charles is absolutely right, and senior leadership is very, very important. But who do you want to be as an employer? You know, do you want to operate in this space? If you do, listening to the colleague, making the right decisions, and actually having processes that are built around that to give confidence internally, but both internally and externally for potential applicants to the business.
I think that's really interesting. I think from our experience as well, and I'll bring Kath and Richard into this discussion, I think the point you make, Mark, about setting out your objectives and your vision early, I think it's a lot of organisations waste a lot of time and money without thinking, how do they know when it's worked? And what are they actually trying to achieve? And whether that's capturing the voice of service users and individuals who might be disabled that are going to benefit most from this service alongside line managers is really important. Kath, just to bring you in on that, from your experience, what would you say would be the most important maybe starting point for an organisation?
I think from my point of view, one of the things that sometimes is a bit of a stumbling block is that disability doesn't seem to be a bit of an issue to some businesses because maybe the disclosure rate is quite low. So I'd say actually before you even benchmark and start any processes, to actually look at what is the prevalence of disability in your business. And actually sometimes you might need to take one step back and start doing some awareness raising, some comms and marketing some events and presenting some case studies maybe to show that disability is something that the organisation is open to hearing about, and it's not going to risk anybody's employment, because actually you may not be reaching the right people because people are not disclosing their disability, which is why some of those stats at the start of the session are really important, because people might be afraid of the consequences of disclosing. So I would say you maybe even need to take one step further back and start doing some positive messaging about disability, and then you can start to look at what are the issues that you're experiencing in your business. And some of the data that you might, are you gathering the right data from sickness absence? Are you looking at your exit interviews to gather information about maybe what the issues are? And one of the things I really liked that you talked about with BT was in the analysis, which is something that we do as well at Medigold, is actually going and asking disabled people what was their experience. So asking disabled applicants, how did they find the process of recruitment? Asking disabled employees, how did they find their experience of having adjustments in place? And then learning from what they're able to tell you. So I think you're right, Charles, top down, bottom up, gives you the power from kind of like sponsorship, but also gives you the right information if you're actually speaking to disabled employees directly.
Right. And Richard, last but not least, your experiences helping design and deliver numerous programs like BT, but others that we work with. What would you say is the most important thing to start when an organisation is considering something like this?
So I think it echoes what Charles was saying. I think really why you're making a change. So are you seeing, for example, one extreme, tribunals, pre-tribunals, where things are going wrong? Are you finding it's difficult to recruit, and actually you don't feel you've got the right kind of people in your business, or you just haven't got the right talent, in which case why are you missing out on a huge group of people who have got that talent? But also some organizations have got existing processes already, but they're not quite working. You might have a report that no one really knows where to go with it. No one really knows who's going to authorize a spend. There's a lot of ad hoc work going, which actually businesses sometimes get used to, but actually a very inefficient way of working. And I think what BT have found, what BT have introduced, is a really efficient way of meeting the needs of employees and also really benefiting the business.
Thanks, Rich. Really great answer. Just building on that point, from my own experience and from working with quite a lot of organisations, this whole concept of disclosure is often one of the biggest challenges. The perception, true or not, that if you put your hand up asking for help, that's going to be a negative and it's going to impact on you being able to, stay in your job and certainly progress. Starting with you, Charles, this is one of the most difficult things I think for organisations, or certainly that causes them the most sleepless nights. Just some basic advice on I suppose, how would you make an impact and create that kind of environment that would facilitate disclosure?
I think going back to what Kath was saying, there's a lot about storytelling, positive messaging, and then I think as well, when you're asking people to share their data with you, you need to be really upfront about why you're asking for that data, what you're going to do with it, who's going to have access to it. So we, for example, we record the number of disabled colleagues that we might have, but that will all be completely anonymized and just used for kind of reporting purposes and to make sure we're having impacts where we want to have impact. But then if you require an adjustment, obviously you need to kind of tell people that, and what you need to kind of tell people your name and all that sort of thing. So yeah, making sure that people feel safe to do that, that you're creating the conditions where there's psychological safety, that managers are confident having those conversations about adjustments, and colleagues know that when they do raise these requests, that they're going to get followed through and that action will be taken.
Thanks, Charles. Marc, your thought?
Yeah, I agree with everything Charles said there. It's about this safety point. We, for example, run a Your Say survey, so an internal sort of satisfaction survey for all colleagues And we do have areas within that survey around inclusion and feeling included, general feedback in terms of how the colleague feels they're being supported in the workplace, and so on and so forth. So these, that's one example of many avenues. We've got the internal network group as well that we can promote through those levers, if you like, or forums or avenues. A level of safety, psychological safety, as Charles says, to make it open for colleagues to actually feel confident that they can declare a disability, that it's going to be properly supported, adjustments are going to be followed through, and there's a centralized team that is supporting the managers as well to make sure that that process is properly followed. Yeah.
Richard, anything else to add?
Just a couple of things. One is, I think, probably how not to do it. I've seen organisations where they've introduced a big sort of survey, but at the same time they've got a lot of other business change as well. So they've got redundancies, they've got lots of, I don't know, office closures, that kind of thing. And actually people are generally worried about, well, why they're being asked to disclose. I think, as Mark said, if it becomes BAU, it's in the fabric of an organisation around the reasons why you're being asked to disclose, the kind of benefits of the organisation, but also how that information, as Charles said, is going to be used. I think it becomes BAU and people are more likely to disclose. I think the other thing is the really top-down messaging. So years ago I worked with an organisation who went from about 4% to about 9% disclosure rate within about a year. It wasn't because they were recruiting lots of people, but it was a really serious top-down message. So that comes back to that strategic goal. There was a really clear vision. There's a really clear vision of why that was being asked for and what the benefits were for the individual, hopefully, in their cohort and the organisation. So I think it has to be a strategic move rather than a big survey. Let's get one to disclose, because I think that often falls down.
And Kath, last but by no means least, anything that's not already been.
So a couple of issues around disclosure, which I think is a bit of a risk to a business. So if you only capture disclosure data when somebody joins a business, there's very little trust there from the employee, so you may not get an honest disclosure at that point. So if you don't ever ask again, you're going to miss that data. The second time is that actually sometimes disclosure comes when some people are backed into a corner by the circumstances at work. So they may be in a capability management process, or they might be in long-term sickness absence management. And at that point, that's when you decide to disclose. Unfortunately, what that means is that disclosure is a negative because it's becoming associated with a problem. So anything you can do to encourage disclosure outside of those two sort of events would be really beneficial, because I think it just ends up being disclosing because they're forced to rather than you see the benefit of doing it.
Great, thank you. Okay, that's really interesting. I'm going to try to bring some of the questions from the audience now. So Luckman's with us. He's asked two questions. I'm going to try to combine them, Luckman, if I can. So this is kind of extending that point around, I suppose, measuring success. How do you know it's worked? So obviously we've got to be careful. We don't want you to disclose anything commercially sensitive, but from a high level, from BT's perspective, what kind of success measures have you looked to in this project? And the other part of Luckman's question, which I think is a really interesting point, is, in your opinion, how do these align with or go beyond a compliance issue? So what is expected from a legal perspective in line with the Equality Act versus what, as an employer of choice, Mark, as you described, BT, how you see that moving? So hopefully that's in a way that you can answer, Charles. I'll throw it to you to start with and see where we get to.
So I think maybe Mark can talk a bit more about the actual measures we use in terms of the workplace adjustments analysis that's done after it's done. But in terms of things that we look at from a D&I perspective, we will be looking at things like our attrition rates for disabled colleagues, how many colleagues we're bringing into the business. We'll be looking at the satisfaction results. We'd like, as Mark said, we do a Eurostay survey where colleagues can tell us how they're feeling, and there's a number of indicators, and we can track that against their protected characteristics. So we'll be looking to see how the kind of satisfaction rates of disabled colleagues are improving. But maybe Mark can talk a little bit about the actual kind of analysis you do around adjustments.
Yeah. So I think I mentioned earlier, we get a monthly report from HML, which is a good base document for us to see, the volumes that have gone through, but also to track in terms of from the point of referral into into the actual assessment, and then the report and the recommendation. Are we getting through that in a timely manner? If we're not, how can we work with the business? So what's been really helpful for us actually is using that data, is starting to get behind some management behaviour, and making sure that managers are engaged in the process, and it's not delegated off to employee relations. We're there to make sure that the manager is following the process. Overall, it's been a success in that. We have seen some cases, and you will find this if you adopt this process, that through this sort of makeup of that particular case might take a bit longer, might need a bit more expertise on it, and so on and so forth. So we've been on a real voyage of journey in terms of how we get through various cases. But generally speaking, we use the monthly report aligned to the SLAs that we have in place with HML. If we've got any outliers, we discuss them, as a sort of working group between BT and HML as well. But also, and very importantly, we're speaking to the units, we're speaking to lead people within the units about their population of people, the types of adjustments they're having, the lead-in times. We did have one area of the business that were actually going directly to access to work previously, and they were finding it was taking 8, 9, 10 months sometimes to get through the process. That's been greatly reduced going through this sort of centralized approach, and actually the referral and the assessment being done pretty much straight away. So we've got agreed SLAs in place with HML. We meet on a regular basis, and we check and balance that, but also, and most importantly, we meet with our stakeholders to bring them in where we need to make any improvements, or we need to recognise that we're getting through the process as we envisage.
Thanks, Mark. Charles. So Richard, just to bring you in, I'll kind of rephrase the question a little bit, because I think a little bit of a hospital pass to Charles and Mark there. With the question is around, for organisations that may be starting to look at this, we've established one of the key starting points is understand what does good look like and why you're trying to achieve this. As an individual who's essentially responsible for the delivery of lots of different programs alongside BT, as well as many others, are there any common success measures that organisations are looking to improve or build on or reduce in some cases?
Well, I think one of the success measures is getting things in place in a reasonable timescale. I think, again, actually kind of echoing Mark's comment there about access to work. It shouldn't be dependent on a kind of access to work decision. Obviously, costs might be dependent for some organisations, but actually, you're looking to get things in to get people, talented individuals, performing well. Being able to press their manager and being able to progress. So there's lots of reasons as to why you want those things in place first of all. And I think the other thing is what does good look like? It's around it's probably more culture. It's probably bringing the organisation around in the journey as well. So I think sometimes you can, we run services obviously for lots of organisations, but actually where we find it works best is when the organisation like BT is really bought into this. So you've got managers, you've got other stakeholders who really embrace it. It's not a sort of handoff supplier. We do everything. So we find those partnership meetings with BT really useful. What's working, what's not working. So really sort of, I guess, coming to the table, with stakeholders, really buying into what you're trying to do.
Thanks, Rich. Okay, just moving on to some more questions from attendees. So we'll start with a question from Louise Atkins, and I think this is a really interesting point as well. So Louise is asking, obviously during the interview process, and something that Kath talked about was the ability to make the environment as comfortable for individuals, regardless of what any needs they may have. I suppose this is going to be an interesting one to discuss. Do you feel that these adjustments should be made as standard? So that principle of universal design that you talked about, Kath, making these changes, make it better for everyone, not just somebody with a specific need, or should it be something that is done only at the point of interview where somebody asks for help or is asked and answers that question? So Kath, I'll start with you from your experience.
So think the benefit to all applicants of having a nice environment for an interview means that if you can do it, you should do it as a matter of course. It also then doesn't mean that you have to wait for disclosure, because people may still not want to disclose to prospective employer in the process. So you are making sure that you have made as many adjustments as you can. And a lot of these are actually not expensive or difficult to do. They're just sort of setting down 4 sort of standards for the way that you interview or the way that you recruit. And if everybody does it to that process, then you're removing a bulk of the barriers, not all of them for everybody, but you'll be reducing the barriers to recruitment that people may be perceiving. And I'm sure everybody will have a better experience of the recruitment process. So if you can do it, I think you should.
Right. Charles, thoughts on that?
Yeah, I do agree. I think one of the things that we're trying to do, and we've not cracked it at all, is trying to be that inclusive by design and trying to find those moments for inclusion in any process that we're implementing, including recruitment. And I'm picking that and looking for opportunities to make it more inclusive. So I think, yeah, definitely, I think things should be as inclusive as possible from the very beginning. And I think also is that thing about tailoring stuff to the individual, tailoring adjustments to the individual when you have that conversation with them, should they need it. So there might be, something might work for the majority of people, but still might be inaccessible to one person. So yeah, still having that quality conversation about what the individual requires.
And Marc, your thought?
Yeah, we're actually doing a bit of work around recruitment and onboarding currently in terms of, the adjustments we make in the recruitment space, for the interview, to participate in any assessments and so forth. That is question-based at the moment. So potential colleagues are asked in the recruitment space if they need any adjustments. What we found is actually just making sure it's robust from that interview stage into the onboarding stage, ready for day one. And for the most part, it is, but there's some improvements we can make there as well. So I agree with Charles. I don't think we've got it cracked completely across all processes, but within this process, definitely we're asking direct questions. That's where we're at now. If as we move forward, we can do that without asking direct questions, and it's more sort of universal, then that's certainly something we will look at.
Right. Richard, anything else to add before we look at one final question?
Yeah, I've just got 2 things. One is, I guess it depends on who are you as an employer. So we do work with, for example, some independent production companies in central London where, it's difficult to have, they find it difficult to have an accessible premise just because of where they are. So, depending on who you are, I guess it depends on how much accessible design you've got baked into your building. But I think the second thing we shouldn't forget is also about interview etiquette. So yes, okay, you've made your accessible design, or you've made the right adjustments, but then equally, if you're interviewing someone who's deaf, you need to be looking at the deaf person, not the interpreter. If you're interviewing someone who stammers, you might need to give them more time to deal with speech blocks. And I don't think that's, it sounds like common sense, but not, so you may have a purely accessible design, but I think you still need to do something additionally around interview etiquette to bring out the best in people.
Thank you. I think we've got time for just one more question. This is quite an important point as well. I'll come to you first, Charles. So, how do you ensure that all staff are aware of disability needs for customers? So, BT is a huge part of your business is working directly with the consumer. How do you address that?
There's 2 things we do. One is that accessible design piece. So all of our new products and services that we develop, we have our customer inclusion panel. So we will get feedback directly from customers to help us make our products and services more accessible. And then there's the second part of that, which is that kind of frontline interaction between a guide, as we call them, and a customer. So within that, there's a number of prompts that are built into the system. If a customer says, it either indicates they've got an accessibility requirement or tells you directly, to help our guides have those conversations, to make sure they're making adjustments for people, customers who need them. And then we're also developing a kind of intranet that'll be available to our customer-facing colleagues with information and guidance about supporting disabled customers.
Right, thank you. And Marc, just looking at it, I suppose your function is almost the customer is the BT workforce and the people you're working with. So, how do you look at that for colleagues using the same kind of question?
Yeah. So, do you just want to repeat the question for me, Matt, please?
Yeah. So I think, how do you make looking at it from internal colleagues, how do you ensure that the wider workforce is aware of the disability needs of, I suppose, individuals and the wider business, if that makes sense?
Yeah, I think it's just on this earlier in terms of, obviously we've got our intranet pages, we've got our network groups as well. We promote the workplace adjustment service, and we have a lot of peer-to-peer stuff that goes on in the business, which gives confidence in other colleagues to access the service. So it's the awareness piece, really, Matt. We have that out there. It's well known. It's subject to a satisfaction survey as well. So we've got this continuous loop of feeding back the satisfaction into the units, and that sort of promotes trust in the process.
And I think that is a great place to start. See, we've overrun a little bit. First of all, apologies. I can see that there are 2 or 3 questions that we've not managed to answer. So we'll do our very best to take those away and come back with some thoughts for what are 3 quite specific questions, looking at them there. But just before we close, I just want to say a huge thank you to Marc and Charles. It makes such a difference to us to be able to engage with one of our clients to give a different perception and actually see how it's working in practice for you. So thank you very much for the effort you've put in before today and obviously for today. Kath, as always, thank you very much for what you've done. And Richard, thanks for joining us at the end and keeping quiet for the rest of the time to make it nice and easy for everybody. Thanks everyone for joining. Like I said, we will be, this session has been recorded, so we're going to upload this to YouTube. Everybody who's attended and or registered for this event will get the link normally tomorrow, if not then over the next couple of days. And that will be there for you to revisit and to share with colleagues. So without further ado, thank you very much for attending. Thanks again to the panelists, and hope you have a great rest of the day. Thanks very much.